the three of us or four of us used to go down there with ropes around our bellies, over the cliff, no safety, no nothing.
Safety was just about unheard of.
The biggest charge I ever let off out there was 15 tonne.
I was wet through to the hide, but I just had to stick it.
Well, number 9 I drove, and she'd do 48 mile an hour.
It was pretty hairy sort of stuff. By hell, it was hairy stuff.
Portland Bay has sheltered ships since sealers and whalers first discovered its natural advantages in the early 1800s, to the curiosity and later to the consternation of the traditional owners. It is the only deep water harbour between Melbourne and Adelaide. And while the bay is sheltered from the worst weather encountered in this latitude, which is from the westerly quarter, it is wide open to the southeast. Full gales only come from this quarter periodically, but they can blow with great violence. Before any jetties were built, the small sailing ships lay at anchor while cargo was loaded and landed in small craft called lighters, necessitating much handling. Up until the 1860s, 20 cargo vessels were driven ashore and wrecked during southeast gales. Losses grew fewer as larger piers were built, meaning that vessels were no longer forced to rely solely on their anchors. Another factor being that during the latter half of the 1800s, steamships gradually replaced sailing vessels in the coastal trade. Even after the piers were built, the fishing fleet was all but decimated on occasions. Plans were drawn up by English harbour expert Sir John Good as far back as 1879, but never acted upon. No doubt finance being the limiting factor. A protecting wall for the fishing fleet was completed in 1890. While this did provide some protection, severe gales still caused considerable damage, as can be seen from these photos taken after the Great Gale of June 1923. The spars protruding from the water are the masts of sunken fishing boats. The Ocean Pier was opened to great fanfare in 1902, but large as it was, it could hardly be compared to the docking facilities available in Melbourne, Geelong and Adelaide. As World War II was drawing to a close, the then Kane government realised the need for development works to create employment for the men returning from active service. It was recommended that engineers with specialised knowledge be appointed to carry out surveys and to draw up plans and specifications of all works necessary to make Portland a first-class port, providing still water in all weather. The Premier received an advance report in 1946 and the final report in 1948. The Portland Harbour Trust was formed in 1949 with the appointment of 3 commissioners, K.S. Anderson, S.L. Patterson and T.C. Jarrett. Born in 1892, Keith Anderson, CBE and MC, was a decorated First World War veteran. Following the war, he became involved in farming and commerce. Appointed chairman of the Portland Harbour Trust in March 1950, he was the major driving force in the development of the port, which was to experience numerous difficulties, setbacks, and even blatant opposition in the ensuing 10 years. However, he was unwavering in his determination to see the project through.
Well, Portland has always been the natural port, natural outlet for the Western Victoria and the southeast of South Australia. In the early days, everything came by bullock team, which naturally came by the shortest route to the seaboard. And transport is the greatest cost factor. And costs have to be reduced, and with the construction of the port and the offering of still water facilities and modern port facilities, I felt that the trade could be rechanneled back to Portland, and the cost to the farmers and the consumers lessened.
Anderson was ably supported by the other two commissioners, Patterson and Jarrett, both professional fishermen who, like their brethren, had long suffered from the lack of an all-weather port, as this photo of Jarrett's boat, the Nilipa, ashore in the area of the present-day boat ramp, amply testifies. No doubt these men also had the development of Portland at heart. The commissioners took on a project which was to be the biggest port development in Australia at the time. We are fortunate that the commissioners had the foresight to see that all stages of construction of the harbour were thoroughly documented photographically and on 16mm film. A temporary office was opened at 91 Bentinck Street in June 1950, and office staff appointed, as well as a chief engineer, Mr. Pat Hughes of the United Kingdom. It was Hughes's vision to build a port to service up to 8 large ships at one time. However, the task at hand was to build stage 1, comprising the breakwater, 2 shipping berths and infrastructure. 1950 and 1951 were occupied in establishment, investigations and formulating plans. Little was achieved in the way of construction. Firstly, a source of stone of suitable quality and quantity had to be identified. Mines Department geologists considered sites at Cape Nelson and at Cape Bridgewater, where a solid mountain of hard bluestone was said to exist.
I saw Mommy kissing Santa Claus underneath the...
In early 1952, I Saw Mummy Kissing Santa Claus was an international hit. While closer to home, the hottest band was the Nutcrackers, featuring Wilkie Jarrett on trumpet, Ron Richards, drums, Johnny Johnston, banjo, Jack Cameron, saxophone, Peter Spencer, accordion, and George Chambers on piano. Aileen White joined the office staff of the Portland Harbour Trust at 91 Bentinck Street in March 1952.
Now in Bentinck Street we had, it was very small. We had the accounts department just across the back, and then we had Joe Brown, the harbour master, Captain Joe Brown, Lou Moulton, and Keith Anderson worked from home. He didn't have an office there at that stage. And then across the front were 3 typists. There was Gwen Hodge, Ellen Black and myself. I enjoyed the work very well, especially working for Lou Moulton, because he was an amazing man. And he was an amazing man with the way he wrote letters. You know, he dictated them. He had the best way of putting words into whatever he was doing. He was a very brilliant man.
She didn't see me creep down the stairs to have a peep.
Physical signs of progress began with the construction of offices, workshops and stores. These were situated on the end of the sand spit at the mouth of Saltwater Creek, which had been a site occupied by whalers and fishermen since earliest settlement.
Well, the office that's there now, when I first started at the harbour in 1954, was temporary. In about 2 years' time they're going to build a new one. It's still there, and we did quite a bit of work on that. Jack Dusting was a Used to work with him quite often, to shift a wall here and put a window there and shove another door there and put a room on there or something, and it was just a hodgepodge. And after a few years, if you went there to do any work inside the office, you're looking for studs where windows used to be and all that sort of thing, you know.
Work also began at the first quarry. While Cape Nelson and Cape Bridgewater had been considered, a closer site was preferred. From Seaward, an area of cliff face north of Blacknose Point and adjacent to the present-day golf course, looked promising.
There was a crop of bluestone protruding from the bottom of the cliff in that cliff face, and the idea was to excavate and try and locate suitable rock for the construction of the breakwaters.
Firstly, an access road was built to the base of the cliff and overburden stripped by Alan Taylor using his new International TD24 dozer, one of the largest in Australia at the time. Holes were drilled, some of them precariously, by diamond drill in preparation for blasting. The first blast at the quarry was fired on the 21st of October using 18 vertical holes up to 70 feet deep, sunk by diamond drill. An access road from Hanlon Parade south to the route of the main breakwater was completed. At about the same time, the first piece of loading machinery arrived in the form of a Harmon 3/4 ton shovel. The first stone was tipped at the base of the main breakwater on the 17th of November 1952, with Keith Anderson present.
You're cheating hard.
As Hank Williams played over the loudspeakers at the Foreshore Carnival in January, work began on the breakwater in earnest following the Christmas holidays. Initially, 4 tip trucks of 6 tonnes capacity were engaged on contract, delivering a total of 200 tonnes per day. It is not known today if the Harbour Trust Commissioners really appreciated the enormity of the task that they had undertaken. In February 1953, Keith Anderson made the bold prediction that there could be still water berths at Portland within 3 years, given the finance. It was to take more than twice that long. The estimated cost of Stage 1 was £5 million, which was also to blow out. For blasting rock, all vertical holes were sunk by diamond drill. However, horizontal holes, in under the cliff to be blasted, had to be drilled with jackhammers, which was hard and dangerous work. Safety helmets, protective glasses and earmuffs were unheard of.
We used to burrow underneath a cliff, 3 foot high, 2 foot wide, 15 to 20 feet in, and then put the T-piece off each end. Then you load her up with explosives and let her go. Oh, good job.
Yeah, you jackhammer like that. They had long nozzles on them. And they'd be going like that, and the compressors would be going, and you'd be going and going and going. No earmuffs. Didn't even have glasses. So there was no need for inspectors in those days, because they wouldn't allow them in, I don't think. One of man's half deaf now.
Merv Weckert began work at the quarry in July, where the lack of heavy machinery was making work difficult.
They had a 3/4 yard shovel and a 5-ton crane to handle anything that come out of the quarry.
The 3/4 ton shovel had little chance of handling the larger stone.
The best we could do was put a strop around the stones, a wire strop around the stones, and the crane would lift them up onto the truck, and then we'd have to get up and take the strop off and repeat the process again. This sometimes was in about 2 feet of mud, which was very exciting.
5 and 6 ton tip trucks were the only transport available and were totally inadequate considering the size of the project. A stone crusher was established at the top of the cliff at Blacknose Point to provide crushed metal for road services and concrete aggregate. A weighbridge of 20-tonne capacity was installed for measuring material delivered by contractors. This became inadequate as the size of the trucks increased.
Well, then they brought the Euclids in and they were too heavy for the weighbridge, so every now and again they'd check weigh a Euclid. Weigh one front wheel, then weigh a back wheel, then go and turn around somewhere and come back and weigh the other front wheel, then weigh the other back wheel. They'd add all the four wheels together to try and get a rough tonnage what you had. But that was pretty rare, that was done. We actually weighed one there one day and we put the front wheel on and the weighbridge just disappeared down to the bottom of the pit. It took a bit of getting her out too.
While work on the breakwater had begun, there was still a large amount of investigative work on design and layout to be carried out. A three-dimensional scale model of the whole project was begun, which was used for the study of long and short period wave action on the finished project and on structures at various stages during construction. The breakwater is like an iceberg, where only a fraction of its mass appears above the water. 85% of the structure is comprised of smaller sized C stone, with larger B stone protecting it from sea action, with larger A stone of up to 10 tonne and more in weight absorbing the heaviest seas. For surveying, seabed sampling, dredging, pile driving and other needs, floating infrastructure was required. Ron Stewart, who had established a boat building and hire business on the foreshore in 1950, was contracted to build a 20-foot workboat, to be named Gannet, which was used for taking soundings and other routine chores. This was followed by two 120-tonne timber barges for use in test drilling, pile driving and dredging. As the Trust's workboat fleet increased with the acquisition of the Lewis and Stirling, which all had to be maintained, a 100-tonne slipway was built. To provide berths for the workboats, the fishing boat Harbour was dredged using a 6-inch dredging pump mounted on an old lifeboat. A jetty was built alongside the slip. When fitted out for dredging, one barge supported a crane and mechanical grab, while the other, with Euclid bodies mounted and fitted with hydraulic rams, disposed of the spoil. The Stirling, ably commanded by Billing Hogan, towed the barges where needed. During the initial period, the Stirling also acted as a dive boat, fitted with the age-old hand-operated air pump, supplying air to a canvas-suited and copper-helmeted diver. In order to reduce sea surge in the vicinity of the boat harbour and slipway, a stone groin was built on the side of the present-day trawler wharf. By mid-1953, it was becoming clear that stone from the Blacknose quarry was less than suitable in both quality and quantity for the building of the harbour.
But as we excavated, we found the rock only floaters, more or less, and not a constant mass. And it was condemned by the people that were the engineers that were controlling the quality of rock to go into the breakwaters. It wasn't good enough, and they wouldn't get the quantity. So that meant Cape Grant. The rock was protruding on both sides of the cape, which was a big indication for them that they'd get good rock and get quantity. And that's what happened.
Before quarrying could begin at Cape Grant, tests on the quality of rock needed to be carried out, which required samples to be taken. Jack Condon was one of the men selected to obtain the samples from the virgin cliff face.
The three of us or four of us used to go down there with ropes around our bellies, over the cliff, no safety, no nothing, and the jackhammer would be lowered down to you, and a basket be lowered down to you, and they'd hold the weight of it for you while you drilled into the side of the cliff and looking down as such. We had to get samples to send down to Melbourne to see if it was all right. And this would happen every now and then. They want more samples. We'd have to go out and do that. But, oh, gee, anyway, little Eddie Hogan, a little fella Eddie was, and he slipped out of his rope one day, and he lucky, how he didn't get killed I wouldn't know, and he just rolled down. Being light helped, I think. And anyway, we finally went down and got him, and all he could say, "I lost my tobacco pouch."
While Cape Grant Quarry was being prepared and an access road built, stone was sourced at Tirrandarra. At first, it could be got by simply collecting from the surface of the ground. By the end of the year, 75 people were on the payroll.
1, 2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, rock. 5, 6, 7.
In 1954, Bill Haley's Rock Around the Clock burst onto the airwaves, giving birth to the rock and roll generation and changing the pulse of popular music forever. Over the summer holidays, a special train brought people on day trips to the seaside on Sundays. Holiday romances ensued, some resulting in marriages which survived to the present day. Meanwhile, the Cape Grant Quarry was being prepared for production with the removal of overburden.
All the overburden was stripped and pushed into the sea. That spoilt my crayfishing area badly, because that's why I used to catch crayfish off the rocks. But once we pushed all that overburden in, we covered all those rocks and there was no more catching crays. Yes, that was the finish of it. It was a vast job to excavate for that quarry. There was quite a number of dozers working on that. There was our machines. We had 2 machines there, and then there was A.R. Taylor with the DT20. Then there was 1 or 2 others with smaller machines, D4s and D6s. Oh, there was a fleet of equipment working to strip the overburden. As we got down, was very stonified. It was very stonified, but it was stone that could be shifted without blasting or anything like that. Till you shifted all that and then got onto the face of the bluestone. The bluestone, it was a solid mass, a solid mass.
The first stone was produced from the Cape Grant Quarry in March 1954, and by mid-year the breakwater had reached over 200 metres, into 6 metres of water. Investigations within the harbour continued with a series of boreholes being put down on the line of the future K.S. Anderson Wharf, which proved that the foundation material was best suited to a piled type of construction. It seems that these investigations did not reveal problems with the rock strata which would emerge later. Heavy plant was gradually being acquired. An Ingersoll Rand wagon drill was purchased, which replaced the slow and laborious work of jackhammering horizontal tunnels into rock to place charges. The most significant acquisition in 1954 was the first of the Euclids, which were to become the real and most visible workhorses of the whole project. The first 6 Euclids acquired by the Trust were only of 15-tonne capacity, but this fleet was soon augmented with the hiring of other contractors using 30-tonne capacity Euclids, which could handle individual stones of up to 20 tonnes. These trucks were specifically designed as off-road heavy-duty haulers by the Euclid Company of Ohio, USA. Normal road-registered tip trucks became known on site as soft trucks to distinguish them from the Euclids. A second stone crusher was established at the Cape Grant Quarry. Keith Anderson, performing the first opening of the chute to let stone through to the crusher, which appears to have jammed. In 19 1955, the Club Hotel at the corner of Percy and Gawler Streets was still catering for the thirsty, while the last of Portland's fish barrow men, Tom Patterson, was also still plying his trade. Usually parked at the Church of England corner, he was selling crays at 2 and 6 a pound and cooter at 2 shillings each. Meanwhile, work on the construction of the Western Approach Railway commenced with the excavation of the cutting through Walsh's Hill. The arrival in February of a huge Marion dragline excavator was a serious addition to the Trust's plant and revolutionised rock handling. The huge costs of £60,000 may be appreciated when considering £1,000 a year were very good wages at the time. This huge 120-tonne machine could lift 20 tonne. Merv Weckett was to become its principal operator.
The Marion, it was a American model. It could be rigged as a 20-tonne crane, also as a 3.5-yard shovel that had all the conversion kit and everything with it, and also had a 3.5-yard dragline bucket with it. So it could do 3 things virtually. And I was involved in all the 3 things over the period of building the wharf with the crane and dragline, and I even worked the shovel out at the quarry.
Reclamation work in the shelter of the breakwater continued to provide land space for cargo storage and handling, access and parking. Firstly, rubble banks were built to contain the reclamation. Fill for reclamation came from a number of sources. Dredged material from the Harbour deepening program was the first to go in, followed by other material including overburden from the quarry, sand and limestone. Soft trucks were employed moving this filling. Having gained a 6-month contract, George Wallace bought a 7 cubic yard Fargo tipper from Portland Truck and Tractor and began work.
And we started on the Harbour Trust and we were getting £1 an hour. £1 an hour. That was £40 a week. Bloody marvellous it was. To back into a place like this here, if you went too far, because it's only sand, and the sand had let go from underneath you, and the next minute you're sitting on your bloody chassis. And then you've got to put your hoist up and try and get rid of the stuff, and if it's a little bit to one side, you're liable to tip the truck over. It was pretty hard on soft trucks. Rest assured of that. By hell, it was hard on soft trucks because of the conditions. See, the trucks that we had in those days were only single drive. Nowadays, with their tandem drives and diff locks and all the rest of it, they could clamber out of nearly anywhere. But not those poor, and 28 horsepower, you know. 28 horsepower motor, side valve, gutless wonders they were, but we made a quid out of them. We got going.
This year the breakwater reached 426 metres in 9 metres of water.
Oh, it's a lonesome away from your kindred and all, by the campfire at night, while hear the wild dingoes call. But there's nothing so lonesome, morbid or drear, than to stand in the bar of a pub with no beer. Now the publican's anxious for the quota to come.
While Bill and Kevin Patterson were netting 100 boxes of salmon on the town beach, work was beginning on the Lee Breakwater, later named the S.L. Patterson berth in memory of their father, one of the original commissioners, who was to pass away the following year. Firstly, an access road was built along the base of the cliff below Cliff Street to Nuns Beach. Squaring up the base of the cliff revealed something quite unexpected.
Well, from what I can gather, years and years ago, there used to be a convict settlement up at the old jail. And as we put the road around the front of it, we come across a tunnel opened up a tunnel, and they tell me that it was built by the convicts as an escape tunnel.
Overpasses were built over the road to give pedestrian access from the town to the beach, and the bathing boxes were moved to the beach side of the road. Soon, the old railway station would be demolished, the railway cutting filled in, and lawn planted. The route of the Western Approach Railway through the swamp was tested by putting down a series of boreholes which showed reasonably firm material, with the exception of 2 patches of peat bog.
There was a lot of difficulty there because the swamp was very unstable and it used to shake everything about, but we could never imagine that a train would be able to run over that type of ground, because it was that unstable. It would shake like a jelly when the dozers were walking on it.
In that area of where the railway is, you could put two lengths of 1/2-inch water pipe together, which would give you 40 feet, and you could push that right down by hand and never come to a bottom. So all the foundation of that railway line and so forth is all just limestone and enough just to sort of spread out enough to you're virtually it's only floating on top.
Rain fell on 80 of the 241 working days, causing some disruption.
Because when I come here, and it was still going, we used to get 32 inches a year. 32 inches a year. And everybody had gumboots on nearly all the time, and into the wet limestone was to fill the water in with rock and limestone on top to push it out like that. It was just squelch all the time, and you had to have boots on, gumboots.
Mud up to your bloody hocks. Christ, mud. They don't know what mud is.
In spite of the very wet conditions of the winter of 1956, work proceeded on the railway bridge over Wattle Creek, where it enters Forthrop Lagoon, the creek being diverted by sandbags.
It got too wet at Walsh's Hill that private trucks were bogging and couldn't get out. So my job was to come along to the Harbour every morning. For 3 weeks I'd done that. Cleaned it down, checked the fuel, sat in it all day, pouring rain. I thought, what a job this is, you know. I wished I was back in the bush at times. Anyway, one day, the bomber. Everyone that worked on the Harbour Trust will have heard of the brown bomber. Son, he said, have you driven that machine? It wasn't a machine, it's so-and-so machine. I've driven it a little bit. Get on the so-and-so thing and drain that water out of that hole. And of course, I hopped on and I'm digging the drain and the water's following me. I was going pretty good, I thought, but the drain's getting deeper and there's a track each side of the bucket, only about that much dirt on each side of it. And next thing, the bank of dirt collapsed and the old Harbour nearly tipped over. She's laying at an angle about like that.
The brown bobber was Bob Davies, and Bob Davies was a Canadian who was recruited as the construction engineer. He was an ideal appointment because he just went from A to B as quickly as he could, and if anything was in the way, he just ran over it. Now, you've got to remember this is the 1950s. If this was the 1990s or the 2000s, I can't see that some of the methods of Bob Davies would have been acceptable.
He had a car, a beautiful big Ford, a sedan car, and he had it painted in the exact colours of the St Kilda Football Club, black, red and white.
The workers on the job always knew when they could see him coming. He was so obvious.
He'd never call you by your name. You. That was all he done. He'd pull up in the car. You.
One of our engineers, I won't name him, complained to Pat Hughes that the brown bomber, Bob Davies, was not qualified. But Pat Hughes, being Pat Hughes, said he didn't want to hear anything about that. Just let's get on with the job.
But I will say that he got the job done. Everybody was pretty lax and everything. Oh, it's going to start and all this, but he soon started up properly, and he never apologised for anything. But he got the job done.
During 1956, the daily output from the Cape Grant quarry doubled, then tripled, with the purchase of a quarry master drill, capable of drilling a 5-inch hole at the rate of 15 feet an hour for the placing of charges.
They worked it that they had a face. The face could have been 25, 30 feet deep with the rocks in the back, you see, and they drilled that across the face, right across. It probably could have been a drilling of a chain and a half or 2 chains, and the charges were close. For a start, they were wanting smaller material. Therefore, to get smaller material, the charges were set close. And if they wanted big stuff, big boulders, the charges were a long way further apart. You see, it wouldn't shatter so much. You see, the big rock would be loosened.
The biggest charge I ever let off out there was 15 tonne in Yellowknight. And I had the Channel 2, Channel 7 there. Watched the blast and everything, but I let off a few swear words and I had to wipe it off the tape.
And after the blasting, it was a job for me with a dozer. I would be there to sweep the floor, because when there was a big charge set off like that rock would fly for a chain and a half and cover all the floor. And nothing could operate on it because it was scattered rock. It had to be pushed back into the face of the rock where it could be picked up and loaded and then carted away. Merv Wackett would be there with the big excavator. He would pull a lot of those big connies out, and they'd be loaded with the excavator.
As the output of the quarry increased, more trucks were required to move the stone. Herbie Watson was one of the contractors operating Euclids. His truck had already seen a lot of work.
He bought old second-hand Euclids from Eildon Weir, and they were second-hand. They were well past it. Some of them even had bits of wattle saplings stuck up in the back to hold the roof up when they arrived here in town.
And they were clapped out old heaps of shit. You couldn't have called them anything else. No doors, no windscreens, and it didn't matter a bugger whether it was raining like mad. They still had to work. Poor buggers, oh Jesus, I don't know why they didn't die of pneumonia. Where the big silos, the big concrete silos are, Watson had a yard and a shed there for his Euclids.
The seaward face of the breakwater was brought up to its final profile and protected with rocks of up to 8 tonne in weight. At the end of the year, the breakwater reached 680 metres in 11 metres of water, and a total of 237 people were on the payroll, not including contractors.
I saw the thing coming out of the sky. It had a one long horn and one big eye. I commenced to shaking and I said, ooh-wee. It looks like a purple people eater to me. It was a one-eyed, one-horn flying purple people.
These were buoyant years for Portland. Borthwick's Meat Works was working to capacity, and with the development of the harbour, unemployment was unheard of. Dick Westlake was selling Holden cars like hotcakes. Greenmount, at the bottom of Wellington Road, built for James Blair in 1841 and claimed to be the first substantial mansion built in Portland, was demolished to make way for bulk oil tanks. The work on the rubble bank retaining reclamation progressed steadily. The seabed along the outer side of this bank was deepened with the spoil being dumped into the reclamation. Other filling was brought in by the soft trucks.
We'd put anything in there, mostly sand, but a lot of the sand we got was beside the Harbour Road, as we used to call it, opposite the golf course. We had, at one time, we had 16 trucks carting sand from there. Normie Kennett was on a little excavator, and it was his job just to load us trucks. We used to keep him going. Laughed all the bloody time. Come on, Jackie, he'd say. No, good bloke, Norm.
J.E. Jorgensen, Proprietary Limited, of Sydney, were awarded the contract for dredging the turning circle and approaches to the wharf to a depth of 11 metres. The dredge comprised a cutting head and a huge centrifugal pump mounted on pontoons. Dredged material was delivered by pipe to the reclamation behind the rubble bank. The dredging contractor began operations in December and immediately encountered problems with the variable nature of the seabed, particularly with layers of boulders. The Trust's barge-mounted Priestman grab dredger was employed removing layers of stones and hard material to assist the operations of the contractor's suction cutter unit. The elder brothers were operators of this dredge over a long period, to the extent that the barge became known as Elders Island. The seabed alongside the wharf was dredged using the Marion and Osgood drag lines.
Dredging with the drag line, I could dredge down to a depth of bit over 40 feet and out around about 80 to 100 feet. All depends on the lay of the land down below. We use the Marion at the KS Anderson right at the bottom end of it to dredge limestone to get the depth for the boats could come in. It was too hard for the Marion bucket to drag it out, so they had to blast it, loosen it up a bit, which involved big domes of steel, and they put the explosives under it. The diver had to go down and put the explosives under the beehives down below and set it off. Well, when this happened, there was naturally plenty of stunned fish about to pick up. But it was abandoned in the long run because it was starting to shake the Catholic Church steeple, and that wasn't really good. Operating the drag line is a little thing of its own. You pull the bucket in and in pretty close, and then let the brake go, and out she goes, and at the same time when it goes out you start hoisting the hoist rope up, and that also helps to pull the bucket out, and it goes way past the end of the boom, which would be anything up to 80 feet. But apart from that, it was just common things to sort of work with that type of work.
Merv drove the Marion, and he was a star. With our soft trucks, the bucket on the Marion, the drag line, if you put the bucket in the back of your truck, it'd nearly fill it up. Well, Merv's job, because he couldn't put the sand where they wanted it, Merv had to load our soft trucks with this bloody Marion. Now you can imagine that he's got a 110-foot jib on it. He had to put it in our trucks, and then we had to either bring it around here or take it wherever it was necessary. So he was a good operator, Merv, because you've got a bucket on a 110-foot jib swinging on 2 cables, and you've got a little weeny truck sitting down there, 7-yard truck, and he's trying to fill the bloody thing up with this drag line. Now that's pretty good work. By hell, it was good work.
A southeast storm, which occurred in June 1957, left large gaps in the unfinished breakwater, to the delight of certain people.
In those early days, it was clearly the case that there were vested interests that wanted the project to fail, and that arose from Melbourne and Geelong interests who didn't share the vision to see the need for a new port in Western Victoria between Adelaide and Melbourne, and the political parties were only giving lip service to decentralisation, which was the reasoning behind constructing the port. There were a number of people in the Portland and district and wider community who thought that the project might not see itself to completion. Now, particularly in relation to the main breakwater, and because of this apathy and criticism, there was always great delight when they'd wake up one morning following a southeaster or another heavy storm and discover that the breakwater was not longer, it was no there in these early days. It was below sea level.
That happened, I think, over the weekend, or it might have been a Friday or a Saturday when the storm hit, and it washed quite a bit of stone off and left my poor old crane on an island, and I couldn't get out to it till about Tuesday. They had to build the stone back in so I could get out to it.
We had one of our huts finished. It was our hut where we dressed. You know, had our clothes and chains and things like that. And finished up at Narrawong Beach.
There was this, you might say, popular view at the time, oh, that's not going to work, look, the breakwater's gone. I well remember that because I lived at 81 Julia Street at the time, and I'd come over the top of the hill looking to the harbour after a storm, and sure enough, yeah, the breakwater would have lost some hundreds of metres, seemingly. But the engineer, the chief engineer at the time, Pat Hughes, was saying, look, that's exactly what we want to have happen, because the main breakwater consisted of a rubble mound from the Cape Grant Quarry. And then it had protection from stone at the time. There were 3 grades of stone, A stone, B stone and C stone at various tonnages. And he said, well, this breakwater has to be consolidated by storm action, sea action. And of course, it was a great source of robust debate in the community at the time. But of course, the chief engineer knew what he was doing and was proven to be correct.
In September 1957, the town was shocked by the sudden death of one of the Harbour Trust commissioners, Sid Patterson. The resulting vacancy was filled by Theo Jarrett, another of the original commissioners. Jarrett had resigned in 1953 to make way for a member of the Overseas Shipping Representatives Association. This was originally H. Watson and later Ralph Anderson, who is remembered in the R.B. Anderson Road.
Theo Jarrett played an important part in the port's progress over a long period of time. And he was one of the original appointees as a commissioner, and he was deputy chair to 1960, worked under Keith Anderson, and took over when Keith retired on the 31st of March in 1961. And I worked closely with Theo Jarrett in my role as the Human Resources person, eventually manager, and up until Theo Jarrett retired from the role in the 1980s.
Hornibrook Mackenzie Clark, commonly known as Hornibrooks, commenced construction of the shipping wharf in July. The huge reinforced concrete piles were made on site. The piling ran into difficulties with extremely variable substrata conditions, which were not forecast from test drilling.
14 tonne was the hammer that they used to drive the piles with, and they put them in position with the big crane out in where they wanted them driven, and then they had Oregon packers on top of the pile so to stop shattering the concrete, and you'd be driving them and a fella would be on with the theodolite checking the so many hits of the hammer, how far the pile drove, and I think it might have been 1/4 of an inch for 3 hits of the hammer, and they reckoned it was set. But quite often you just about get the pile set where it was just about finished the job, and all of a sudden one more hit with the hammer and the pile might take off, as it did. There was places on the wharf here where they have joined 3 60-foot piles on top of each other to get a set, and it's caused a lot of problems because the caves had let go.
Best bit of day's fishing we ever done was down there. Welders and that were out there and so forth, and then comes a shoal of fish. Dropped the welder leads in about 10 feet apart in amongst the fish. Up they'd come, a fella come across with his tinny and had half a boat full of bloody fish there at one stage. So only stunned them, they didn't kill them, only stunned them. But a good feed of fish though, was had by everybody.
Hornibrooks are a good firm to work for. They ask us when we do 8 piles a day, they'd put on a slab of beer for the fellas on the team that worked on the gantry, or the ones that didn't drink, they'd get them a carton of cigarettes. So I didn't drink or smoke at the time, so they gave me a great big carton of steamrollers the day we drove the 8 piles.
Where piles had to be spliced one on top of the other, concrete was chipped to expose the reinforcing. This was then boxed and concrete poured. Once the piles were correctly set, precast concrete slabs were placed on top to form the wharf decking. The lee breakwater was extended to 330 metres and the main breakwater reached 984 metres to a water depth of 13 metres. This comprised 576,000 tonnes of rock. Financing the building of the port had been an ongoing difficulty. The Trust's works program for 1957-58 was estimated at £1.5 million. However, the state government slashed this by 1/3 to a little over £1 million, of which £800,000 had to be raised by the Trust itself, by way of private loans or public issues of stock or debentures. These cuts were to push the completion date out by another year.
I can remember our days mainly typing letter after letter looking for finance, and they'd go all over northern Victoria as far as Mildura, and we used to get sick of these letters because we couldn't duplicate them. They all had to be done singly, and we'd spend the whole day typing letters looking for finance, and that's the part of the job that I remember most. And then we'd get an answer back and Lou would say, "Great job, we've got some money," you know, and that was the big thing.
There were many times when Keith Anderson and Lou Moulton, the secretary, were tramping up and down Burke Street, knocking on doors of brokers and government officials and others to try and get the funding to meet the annual program for development. And he would not accept no for an answer. And if he hadn't have plugged away in conjunction with Lou Moulton to raise the money, it would have failed. Quite clearly it would have failed. And the government of the day only provided a minor portion of loan money, government loan money. The rest had to be raised by the commissioners, and that was in the form of private loans from like superannuation or stockbrokers, and public loans.
Pardon me, boy, is that the Chattanooga Juju?
Yes, yes, track 29.
Boy, you can give me a shot.
Can you afford to board?
Work progressed on the railway and the necessary bridges and overpasses at Garden Street, Bridgewater Road, and the bridge at the western end of Julia Street, where the rail line crosses the creek, the place being virtually unrecognisable 53 years later. Saltwater Creek, between the harbour and Forthrop Lagoon, was diverted and straightened, in the process demolishing the old showgrounds oval, as well as the back half of the Botanical Gardens, which had been laid out in earlier times as a fascinating maze of canals, bridges and islands. The old wooden bridge at the bottom of Wellington Road disappeared, and with it the deep Devil's Hole beside it, which had been a favourite swimming spot for generations of local kids. Thousands of tonnes of overburden from the quarry were brought in to reclaim marshland for the siting of industries along Canal Road.
Kevin O'Day drove one of Watson's dozers near where the trawler berth is now, and there was a penguin reserve, but that wasn't there at the time. But Kevin O'Day pushed all the sand up, and Teddy Jennings and I we loaded these 16 trucks.
We took 40,000 yards off that beach. There was about 7 foot depth of sand there when I started, and you went right down to a limestone rubble.
And we put, I think it was 20 or 30,000 cubic yards of beach sand where the tennis courts are now. That used to be very low there, and the canal, that was never there. The Harbour Trust dug that canal and put those bridges across it and everything.
In April 1958, the canal bridge on Cliff Street was completed and weight tested with loaded Euclids. Work continued apace, which is not to say that everything ran smoothly.
A couple of Euclids went over the turning circle and went in, and of course they had to be pulled out with a dozer or a crane or something like that.
On the construction of the lee breakwater, we went out so far, and I don't know whether you've seen the photographs of the start of it, but you'd go out so many feet or so many yards, and then there'd be a turnaround for the Euclids to turn around and back up. Jack Spencer was one of the fellas driving the Euclid in those days. And of course they never had any brakes on them. So Jack comes in a little bit too fast this particular day, straight over the end of the platform. In Euclid, him, Jack, the whole lot went in. A few seconds later, up pops Jack, and he went down, come up, went down again, and Jim Duffy was there, he was a tele clerk, and he managed to grab him by the hair and haul him up a bit. And that was Jack's experience of Euclid driving. Very silent sort of a lad he was.
The body is gone now, but there was a body of a Euclid, the bloke parked it up the top there, and he couldn't have put the handbrake or chocked the wheels, and it rolled over the cliff, and people will remember the old body of a Euclid laying down there for years and years.
Overburden off the quarry, Cape Grant Quarry, that was done earlier in the piece. Unfortunately, one dozer did go over the edge. He got off in time, but the dozer didn't. It went down, landed on a flat rock, and still going. The motor was still ticking over, and the big problem was now how we're going to get the dozer out. So one of our old dozer operators, who used to work for the CRB, he said, "Oh, build me a road down." He said, "I'll go down and drive it up," which he did. It took him a day to build a bit of a track down where the dozer was, and he walked down, and he got on the dozer and carefully turned it around on the big flat rock it was, carefully turned it around and drove it up the road and saved her.
In July, the Prime Minister, Robert Menzies, with his wife, Dame Patty, arrived for an inspection of the new works. After being welcomed by Keith Anderson and the Mayor, Mabel Hedditch, he was guided around the site by the Harbour Master, Captain Joe Brown, and claimed to be suitably impressed. Cape Grant Quarry maintained a high standard of output, and a new face 15 feet below sea level was opened up to produce high-grade rock for crusher operation. By now, the quarry had 3 rock faces, 2 at 35 feet and the lowest at 25 feet. The quarry output for the year was 458,000 tonne. Ian Malcolm began driving Euclids at the tender age of 17 and without a driver's licence.
Older drivers used to put the wind up you at trying to frighten you, but if you didn't get bluffed, you were right. You know, one of the first lessons I got taught was never bail out when they rear up in the air, which they would do if you had a heavy load. When you're tipping a heavy load, the front wheels would come off the ground, could be up to 6 foot off the ground, but before they start coming down.
You'd brace yourself against the wheel because you knew when it'd come down there was a big bang and she'd jolt you about in the cabin. So it was pretty rough work driving the old Euclids.
Ian had a startling experience with an overloaded Euclid.
And Keith just spun around and said, "Here, you take it out and get rid of it." Right. So we had to turn around at the end where the wheat shed is now, the K.S. Anderson Wharf, and back right out to the end where the Marion was. They were placing them. And the load was actually that heavy that we were swaying going out. I was really worrying she was going to tip over, but anyway, got to the end. And an old chap out there, Jim Duffy, was a spotter, and he put us in where he wanted it. And I started tipping, and as it went up, the big rock moved, and the whole Euclid moved with it, and it reared in the air, and it sat on the tailboard of the Euclid and spun around. The rocks fell out, but the truck spun around in mid-air and came down and faced back out the way if it had drove out. So it was back all the way in again. You know, oh, that was a hairy old experience. The whole load went 62 tonne, according to the measurement. Yeah, it was a bit too heavy. Well, we're only getting paid for 30 tonne on the big ones, and they were 22 yards on the other ones. You know, so we're well over, you know.
Duffy, I think he was. He had to tell the Euclids where to tip the stuff, and then the dozer would clamber over it and push it in. It was a pretty dangerous sort of a job, because it didn't matter a bugger if the wind was howling at 120 mile an hour. These blokes were still on the end of the breakwater pushing these rocks in, and the waves would be breaking over them. Old Duffy would be there, and he'd be shivering like mad, wet as a shag, but he still had to be on his post, because the Euclids, they had no mirrors on them. No mirrors, and the blokes, he used to have to tell them, you know, a little bit left or a little bit right, and then sometimes they'd get near it and sometimes they would. Oh God, they were funny days, those, when
and you'd be there, it had to be there, rain, hail or shine, and high tide or a southeast blowing, and you'd damn near get washed out of your seat. The water would come up and splash. Many a ducking I got. I was wet through to the hide, but I just had to stick it and keep going. Yeah.
Well, the southeast wind come up. You know, being a fisherman, you know what the southeast is like. And she just come over the top of that and washed these big rocks out like this. I'm playing marbles with them. And the bomber sent me down there with a D8 to push them back, because in those days I used to wear a flying suit because that was fairly waterproof. So down I go to this D8 and I'm struggling to push these marbles back, and over had come a wave, and the only thing that kept me on the tractor was hanging on to the two steering levers, because there's that much force of water come over there, I would have gone out the back. Hadn't been able to hang on to it. That was very interesting for a while.
Sadly, 2 lives were lost during construction of the breakwater. However, considering the scale of the project and the numbers of people involved, coupled with the safety standards of the time, the death toll may well have been worse.
Safety was just about unheard of. If you could do the job, you'd done it, and that was about it, you know. It was a lot of the work was terribly dangerous. With I think the piles, I think they weighed about over 20 tonne, I think they weighed, and they'd be swinging over you and putting in position, and you used to climb up the pile frame and clamp them down, and I was unlucky enough to lose a finger on the job when they were driving them. They were shifting the pile frame along, and it got jammed, and I went to release it, and a big piece of steel came back and lopped the finger off on me. But there was a lot of work those days at building this thing. Hornibrook's crane was on 4 big legs. I forget, it might have been 15 or 20 foot high up to the cabin on it. And Ronnie, I forget his name, the dogman, he used to ride the hook everywhere those days. He'd get on the hook and they'd swing him out over onto the piles or wherever you want to go, whether it be up 60 foot high, it didn't worry him. But there was a few close shaves at times. I saw him nearly come off the hook a few times, and that when he was riding the hook. And the little fella driving the crane, he used to love to get any of us other fellas on the hook. He'd swing you out over the water and he'd start dropping you in the sea. But we caught up with him in the finish. We caught him when he was coming off the crane one day, and everyone set him up with a lot of buckets of water, so we got him back a few times, yeah.
Building of the lee breakwater continued during periods when work on the main breakwater was held up by weather conditions. A high spray wall was built on the breakwater adjacent to the wharf area to prevent seawater washing across the wharf in heavy seas.
Chantilly lace and a pretty face and a ponytail hanging down, a wiggle in a walk and a giggle in a talk. Make the world go round. There ain't nothing in the world like a big-eyed girl to make me act so funny. Make me spend
While potatoes were still being delivered to the rear of the Henty Hotel by horse and cart, patrons were able to enjoy a drink on the sun deck, watching the breakwater near its fully designed length of 1,270 metres. The bulk of the breakwater was constructed of sea stone, which could be tipped and pushed into place by a bulldozer. However, much larger A and B stones were required on the outside face in order to withstand wave action over a long period.
There's only two classes of stone that I'd handle, would be B stone and A stone. The B stone being anything over 4 tonne and A stone anything up to 20 tonne. And that was left for me to construct what you see around here, out in the water, from the water's edge down 30 foot of water. I had to build it up to a bank of 30 feet of water first, and then place the stone on a 3-to-2 batter up to water's edge.
Operating the huge Marion crane called for considerable coordination and skill.
You had to coordinate everything with your legs and your hands, and you had to think ahead what you were going to do while the stone was swinging around in the air, where you were going to place it. If it was out in the water, well, you'd let it drop, and you'd wait for the sound of it to hit something, and you could just about gauge how deep it was, which was quite interesting. That took quite a long time to learn that procedure, but I did get around to it, and we had to do something like that to bring the on the outside of the breakwater, bring it up on a 3-to-2 batter, and that's pretty hard to do with big stones, but that's the general lay of it.
We're all on contracts, see, back them days, and each company was fighting the other for the contract. You know, there was another contract coming up, and our boss used to say to us, "There's no speed limits today, go for it." And we could go for it too, because some of them old ones with the automatic transmissions in, you'd get, number 9 I drove, and she'd do 48 mile an hour, and that was loaded or empty. And some of the others, some of Watson's old girls, they could get along quick, you know, you'd be racing all the time, but then you'd meet the Harbour Trust Euclids on the road, and they were flat chat, those little fellas, about 28 mile an hour, and they'd get in the way, or the grader would get in the way. They actually weren't allowed to do any more than about 8 loads a day per truck. That kept it legal at your 30 mile an hour speed limit. But when these new contracts were coming up and you'd get into it, well, I can remember doing 14 a day to the lee breakwater, you know, really hooking in.
Well, you took your life in your hands when you went on the road, because the Euclids were so much wider than the soft trucks, and then the soft trucks, because we were on a hourly hire, we had to keep going, because if we stopped and the bomber come along, the bomber would say, "Right, what's wrong with you? What do you stop for? Get out there and get some more dirt." And you just had to keep going. And it was go, lickety-spit. By hell, there was no beg your pardon with them. They just kept going. Big buggers, oh shit. It was pretty hairy sort of stuff. By hell, it was hairy stuff.
One of the highlights of 1959 was the arrival of the Ixion, the first ship to use the K.S. Anderson Wharf. Temporary provision was made to unload this special piece of heavy equipment for the Australian paper mills at Millicent. The transportation created considerable interest, there being 2 trucks involved, one pulling, the other pushing.
It was a major event in the town, and I do remember quite a bit about it because it was a very significant event to have the first vessel berth at the modern port, and it was very celebratory. And I remember the office staff took the day off, and I know the male members of the office staff saw what happened, and then we thought, well, the day is gone, we'll adjourn to the Max. I can well remember it.
The convoy proceeded out of town along Hanlon Parade, past the site of the present-day Seacliff Place and the Ford dealership, which was the main artery into town in those days. The decking of the K.S. Anderson Wharf was completed, and building fenders to allow ships to lay alongside was underway. For the timber springing piles, turpentine logs were brought from Queensland. These were chosen for their resistance to the marine woodworm, especially with their bark left on. Fabrication of the massive fender beams involved bolting 4 40-foot lengths of Oregon timber together to create a beam 3 feet by 3 feet, or 900 by 900. The spring of the piles was augmented by rubber buffers between the horizontal beams and the wharf, and fastened by chains. A contract was let to Dutch Australian Constructions for the building of the transit sheds for the storage of cargo. The first task was to drive concrete piles through the reclamation into bedrock, to give a firm foundation before the huge slab was poured and steel work erected. Meanwhile, concreting of the breakwater roadway, parapet and spray wall was well underway. The roadway was boxed and poured in sections, which provided its own challenges, given the porous nature of the rock foundation. Steps had to be taken to prevent the concrete from oozing out under the boxing. Jack Condon was foreman of the outer section.
All the cracks around had to be plugged with hessian, and mainly hessian and really plugged, and then was tested with water to see it didn't go through them. We knew it was go down, so that was all right. And then when we knew that was plugged properly around the sides, then the beach sand would go in, and the crane would lift it in again in a bucket and let it go, and then a power hose would hose it everywhere, and they kept hosing and putting it in until it stopped and wasn't running out anywhere.
Once the boxed section was sealed, 6 large anchor rocks were placed evenly within the square. Then smaller rocks were placed between these. A concrete slurry was then run down between these rocks till only the tops of the anchor rocks were visible, which was about a foot below the finished surface.
And then from there you'd do your ordinary cement over that like we have now. And that'd be ordinary cement 3, 2 and 1. And then that was that. But a lot of manual work in it, heavy stuff. The spray used to come over, but we sort of had a shelter up like a tarpaulin to take the weight of it, and the fellas would be working in their clothes with it, and it just carried on. You'd be hoping that it wouldn't, but it wouldn't do any damage to anybody. We used to do about 2 slabs a week, got a lot of preparation in them, and you maybe 3 at a real good time, no weather problems or anything like that.
There were 2 gangs concreting. One began on the inner end and worked out, while Jack's team started at the outer end and worked in. The 2 ends met perfectly.
Actually, I think the bomber sent over a dozen bottles of beer for us. That's because he'd have all the praise in. He could afford it.
Not all activities on site were officially sanctioned.
Yeah, it was a bit of skullduggery, yeah, gosh, yeah. There was a team of fellas working the crusher. Dick Chandler was sort of in charge of it, I think he was, and through the night they used to work 2 shifts, like day and night shift, and through the night someone thought, by gosh, it'd be a great idea, we'll do a bit of spotlighting. But it was about where Alcoa is now, I think. They got on the old Farm All AM tractor with a spotlight, and they're going to shoot rabbits over on just on that bank over there, sort of thing. But they bogged the tractor. No worries, they come back and got a Euclid. So a Euclid went out to pull the tractor out, but they bogged a Euclid. So we'll have to do something before the boss arrives in the morning with all the machinery over there where it's not needed. So someone got on the little TD14 bulldozer, took it over, and blow me down, it blew the transmission up before it got there. So in the morning when the bosses arrived, a lot of blokes went home, went missing, a lot of red faces, but I forget the final outcome, but someone would have got a bit of a smack on the wrist over it.
It was Keith Anderson's vision to have a lookout build on the end of the breakwater. Alan Kester led the construction team building the lookout, which featured a glass-enclosed spiral ramp to the top. The spiral design soon led it to be dubbed the corkscrew. As 1959 was drawing to a close, the work on the main breakwater was nearing completion. Reclamation work was begun for the siting of the pivot fertiliser plant, still using stone from Cape Grant for the seawall.
I had some good fun out there. Christmas break up in 1959. Everybody had to do a load after dinner, and all us blokes from Euclid Trucking Company wanted to get the load in, get rid of it, because we had to go into the workshop and take all the tyres off, and there was 2 semi-trailers waiting there to take the tyres to Melbourne to be relugged over the Christmas break and come back. Anyway, what they did, they loaded, all went back after lunch, we all got one load. And they loaded the Harbour Trust Euclids and Newham's little ones and their big ones and Watson's and the mob I was with. And I think from memory there was either 38 or 42 Euclids lined up there. And we lined them up slowest to fastest, like a Grand Prix race. And we took off. When at 2 o'clock we had to leave the quarry, and we took off, and there was the road rules were no passing, and at one stage of the game we were 3 wide coming in around Blacknose, and Pat Hughes, the chief engineer, he was going out to the quarry. I was out passing one of the Harbour Trust Euclids, and Joe Linders with Eric Newham's company, he was out passing me because he was about 2 miles an hour faster than me. And Pat Hughes, the chief engineer, was on his way out the quarry, and there was nowhere for him to go but take the scrub in his Holden. Things weren't real happy about that.
It was an itsy bitsy teeny weeny yellow polka dot bikini that she wore for the first time today. An itsy bitsy teeny weeny yellow polka dot bikini, so in the locker she wanted to stay. 2, 3, 4, stick around.
Attractively situated on a peninsula, Portland has always been a popular holiday resort, with good surf as well as beaches with placid water, ideal for children. The town council provides camping grounds and caravan parks, and these are equipped with more than the usual comforts and services.
While holidaymakers cooled off at Henty Beach, Johnny Johnston caught another great white shark towards the North Shore, as he did most summers. The Trust's workforce was increased to 400 to have as much infrastructure as possible completed before the grand opening, which had been set down for the 19th of November, Henty Day. The pressure was on. The transit shed was completed and much energy was put into finishing curbing, drains and footpaths and putting the final seal on roads. The gatehouse, pickup hall, waterside workers' amenities block and offices were 95% complete by the time of the opening. Main breakwater seaward protection was almost completed, bringing the total amount of rock in the breakwater to a staggering 1.75 million tonnes. A week-long program was planned to celebrate the opening. The American icebreaker, Staten Island, arrived on a goodwill visit, while the bridge of the Australian destroyer HMAS Quiberon served as the platform for the opening ceremony, with speeches given by the Governor of Victoria, Sir Dallas Brooks, and other dignitaries.
On this proud day in Portland's history, let me say that a new port such as this is visible proof of man's ingenuity, his skill, and his industry. To have constructed this great port to become a gateway to the Western District is a most imaginative enterprise. It all goes to prove, doesn't it, that the spirit of our pioneers of yesterday still persists in the hearts and the minds of the people. It is now my proud and happy task as the representative of Her Majesty the Queen, formally to declare open this new port, the Port of Portland.
An hour-long procession, led by one of the Euclids, followed the official opening. 44 floats and 28 teams of marching girls paraded from the New Wharf area, along Cliff Street, Bentinck Street and Julia Streets to the Royal Hotel.
And in the opening celebrations we had greetings from the Port of New York, the Port of London and other ports around the world. And it was an absolutely wonderful week and a wonderful occasion. But it did take a lot of extra effort to get there on time for the opening.
For all the grandeur of the opening ceremony and its aftermath, it is the Grand Ball, with 3,500 guests, that is best remembered.
My wife Aileen and I were at the ball. It was a most magnificent occasion. And the Governor of the day, Sir Dallas Brooks, said he had never seen so many people at an indoor venue at a ball in his life.
That was a party. Yeah. God, there was some people there then.
We had to lay part of the dance floor too, which is virtually just chipboard laid on the concrete. That night, the opening night, you'd be dancing around the chipboard, it'd be moving under your feet, and you'd stumble over the joints and that sort of thing. No, nobody cared a hoot. And they had on the eastern side of the number 1 transit shed, where the RAF band was, they had a stage like that, like a bow of a ship, just about a third, the bows that come around and that. And when you're dancing around, of course, they'd all come to the bow of their ship, and it was like a traffic jam in Burke Street, and you had to shuffle your way around, and once you got past the bow, she was on again, But that was a real good night, great fun, Everybody enjoyed that thoroughly.
Pulled the jelly out of a 25-pound plug, pulled it up with sawdust, put a fuse in it, went about halfway through it, went over to the boss, said, "Got a present for you, boss, see ya." So he lit her up, and everybody scattered, and we're sitting there talking and drinking.
But it was a very gala event, I can tell you that. Great food, plenty of music, plenty of booze. It was real good. I think I did write myself off that night.
Thus, Stage 1 was completed, a permanent monument to all those who made it happen. It ran over time and over budget. It has only 5 berths, not 8 as originally planned. The bold predictions of the port promoters of the 1950s, of Portland achieving a population of 60,000 by the end of the century, came nowhere near realisation. But who, would you say, would wish to be without it? The loggers and the chippers? the importers and the exporters, the farmers and the fishermen, the yachtsmen and the anglers. No, no one, we say, would wish to be without it.
When you think back of what was here in '54 to what it is now, it's just a big advance. It is something to be proud of, yeah, very much so. I think it is.
We had good times, we had bad times of course, but I think we had possibly more good times than bad times on the job. We had a good crew working with us. They were all there for the one purpose, to get the job done. And they certainly did it. There's no doubt about that.
Like I said before, there were 16 soft trucks. We were a real good fraternity. If one of us broke down or blew a tyre or anything like that, the others would stop and help us. You were never on your own.
And everybody was very nice and worked very hard. I mean, you didn't just finish at 5 o'clock or anything like that. You just kept working. If the work was there, you just kept working, you know, till it was finished. Yeah.
Keith Annis is another man I admired very greatly. I think we all did. If it hadn't been for Keith, that place wouldn't have been down there.
He was a wonderful man to work with. He was a born leader, and he really had everybody right behind him. He was a visionary, and it was just wonderful to be part of the project with him as the leader.
This program is dedicated to the memory of our friend, Merv Weckett, champion on the Marion, who sadly did not live to see it completed. Since Stage 1 was completed, a further 3 berths have been added. The provision of infrastructure is ongoing as trade changes and handling techniques evolve in our modern world.